Great. Hello and welcome everyone to Unconvention. For those of who are just joining us, we just completed a fascinating conversation on how SaaS products can be made to work for rural markets and how this can help with better accessibility and affordability of healthcare. We are now starting our second session of the day, which will explore successful models in water efficient agriculture. This session is being moderated by Richie Ahuja, who is a Senior Director, Global Climate at the Environmental Defense Fund. So over to you, Richie.
Thank you so much, and good evening. You're talking to me from the other side of the world, and really delighted to be here. Yes, as I work for Environmental Defense Fund. Just very quickly, Environmental Defense Fund is a 50-year-old nonprofit focused on preserving the natural system on which all life depends. Our strength is basically around our ability to forge pragmatic solutions by combining state-of-the-art science, economics, politics, community, and unusual partnerships. And I'm sure we'll hear a lot of all of that in this discussion. And we posit that environmental progress and economic prosperity can really go hand in hand. In India, just very quickly, our work spans multiple sectors, but a big question is, can India modernize its economy and lift hundreds of millions of its citizens into the middle class by leapfrogging the dangerous air pollution, a water crisis, and high carbon emission trajectory that other countries have followed. And rural India is, I think, where a big focus is for us, because this is part of the world, which is what I call aspiring India. And they're going to make so many choices on how to grow food, use water, what kind of energies they consume, which brings us down to water here today. We have a terrific panel in front of us. Let me just go around very quickly and do a quick introduction as I see them on my screen. I have Reshma Anand. Reshma is the CEO of Hindustan Unilever Foundation. The foundation operates the Water for Public Good program with a specific focus to empower village-level community institutions to govern water resources and enhance farm-based livelihoods through adoption of judicious water practices. The projects are, I think, in 57 districts and in 11 river basins. So really delighted to have you here, Reshma, and would love to learn more about the program. Next on my screen is Kavita Sachwani. Kavita leads the 2030 Water Resources Group in the Maharashtra program and is working towards creating a wider political economy conditions and momentum for change in water reform. The focus of this 2030 Water Resources Group include agricultural water use efficiency, municipal water loss reduction, and industrial waste use reduction and reuse. She has 2 decades of experience spanning work in public health, financial inclusion, and water resource management. And we also here have Malesh Tigali. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Malesh is the founder and CEO of Farm to Fork Technologies, private sector here. Their product, Cultivate, is an intelligent platform that collects the farm and crop parameters, analyzes them in real time, and takes corrective action to provide precise amount of water for every plant using pulse irrigation. Cultivate is helping farmers save 20 to 50% of water and get 20 to 30% more yield with less pests and disease. So that said, a couple of quick data points to warm up, and then we dive right in. We have an audience, I assume, of a lot of entrepreneurs here. So here's some interesting thing, very big picture on water. Did you know that groundwater happens to be the most extracted resource on the planet? We are using it at a rate of that is 3 or 4 times faster than it can be replenished. So that's a real challenge. And then now pivot to India. Did you know that India draws up 25% of the world's groundwater? 2 times more than China and India, US combined, and 80% of that is agriculture. So we have a crisis, folks. And how does one think about solving this crisis? It's not just of water, it's of lives and livelihoods. This looming challenge to economic growth in ways that are first and foremost, and how do we solve this in a way that is first and foremost, I'd say, equitable and just? So with that, let's dive in. Let's sort of begin to understand how we arrived at this place. How did it come to be? They say the road to poor outcomes is often paved with good intentions. So offering a frame would be helpful. So Reshma, why don't, maybe I call on you first. Why don't you sort of talk a little bit, given your experience in this field and your knowledge, help us understand how we came here. What happened culturally and overall? I mean, how are we where we are today?
I think, it's very well known that, in our quest for food security, we've created, the challenges on water. But when, the entire, Green Revolution was unleashed in the 1980s, and the movement, to actually get farms to produce, a large quantity of food grains which could make us, food secure, took place. We actually took it for granted that water is an endless resource, right? And we often, look at the issue of water in India and why we are today where we are as the problem of half. So Kavita's group, for example, WRG 2030 makes it very clear that India will have half the water it needs as a country by 2030.
Wow.
But what we also need to recognize is that half of our agricultural land is under rice, wheat, cotton, and sugarcane, which are water-intensive crops, right? Our water productivity is half, of any average you may want to take, and that's being conservative. So we take typically 2 units of, water to produce, food that would require 1 unit anywhere else in the world. And I think the larger challenge is the fact that half the rural population actually depends on agriculture for means of living. Not even half of the country actually has access to irrigation, organized irrigation through our canal system. And so farmers had actually nowhere else to go but to extract groundwater. And relentless extraction has actually brought us where we are today. The interesting part is that while there is, a very clear issue in terms of, the extraction of groundwater, this is not an issue that farmers are not aware of, right? So one of the big narratives that we kind of tend to hear typically is that farmers don't know better. And actually, as we've traveled across the country and worked in, states that cover a wide spectrum, of groundwater challenges and rainfall and irrigation systems, what has come through is that farmers recognize it's a depleting resource. But what they lack are solutions that can actually be deployed to, mitigate this risk while protecting their yields, while protecting their economics.
Right.
And I think this is the exciting space for a lot of entrepreneurs to actually move in, because it's not that farmers don't know that they have a crisis.
Thanks, Reshma. That's really, really helpful, just that little journey. So Malesh, just you're here from the technology angle, so maybe I can ask you to jump in. Historically, what role do you see technology and how did that sort of exacerbate the situation we are in? What kind of technologies were deployed that allowed some things to happen, perhaps all with good intentions, but here we are.
Thank you, Richie. It's a pretty good question because technology is just a tool. It can give the desired results provided you understand the different elements of that and use it in the right proportion. For example, if you go back to the irrigation, which is the focus of today's discussion, irrigation is not a new thing. It has been there for last almost 8 to 10,000 years back in various forms, and different countries, they have adapted at different levels. Now we need to take a look at and understand why the same technology or same tools performing at different levels in different countries. Because there are different elements that connects with the local conditions. What works in Israel, for example, may or may not be suitable for US and may or may not be suitable for in India. Because along with the usage of the tools, we also need to bring in the cultural practices of people. In India, to a larger extent, when we talk about drip irrigation, either it is a flood irrigation or sprinkler irrigation or drip irrigation. But all of that requires human intervention. That means we are looking for farmers to understand what is happening, bring in their prior experience of understanding of the agriculture and leverage on that. But if you see the other side of technology, there is so much of advancement in the seed, for example. A seed variety that was there for 20 to 30 years back required different amount of water compared to today's seed that we are using for growing paddy or wheat kind of thing. The agroclimatic condition, the usage of fertilizers. When you use more and more fertilizer, the characteristics of soil changes, which requires the amount of water what you were giving before and the way you were giving could change. Textural classes. If you are having more of a clay soil versus sandy soil, the speed with which you need to give water should change. But what is in India, we believe irrigation is just irrigation. We take drip irrigation pipes and connect it to the field. And we allow the farmers to make an uninformed decision. That means when a consultant says you need to provide irrigation for 4 hours, we don't tell them 4 hours depend on various factors that they should be aware. If they are not aware of that, they end up giving either excess water or underwater. It will not give the desired results. Now, going to what Reshma was saying earlier, the water usage, if you look at some of the states like Punjab, in certain districts, the water extraction is as high as roughly around 260%. That means if 100 liters of water is getting into the ground through rain and other options, 260 liters is being taken out. So that is very clearly why the groundwater is depleting at an alarming rate. And one hand side, we don't have too much of land to increase because land is fixed. But the population is increasing, the demand for food is increasing, but the available water is reducing. So there is a technology. Technology already exists. We need to take it to the farmer, including customer as the stakeholder, understand what are the challenges he's having in implementing the way it was intended to be implemented, and get the desired result.
Thanks, Malesh. That's helpful. It's intriguing. You're talking about technology from a 360-degree lens, not just technology for water, but everything else that also impacts water. And we can come back to that. One of the things that comes to mind to me is the deep rock drill that sort of proliferated and led to a lot of withdrawal of water from the groundwater from the Indian conditions here. So Reshma, let me just bring you in here really quickly. You're working with the World Bank. Perhaps help us understand how the management of the resource shifted over time, very briefly, maybe in under a minute and a half, and then we can sort of focus more forward-looking on what's going on and what kind of experiments are going on in the field.
Richie, was that for me? You said Reshma.
Sorry, not Reshma, sir. Kavita, my apologies.
Right.
No, Kavita, you're not on my screen.
1 second. I'm losing you for a beat.
No worries. Please carry on. I'll be more careful.
You see me now?
No, I can't.
Basically,
but,
I think just to build on what Malesh just mentioned, before the development of drip irrigation, I think irrigation was being done by traditional methods of canal network and flow irrigation. So in this method, about 60% water was lost due to conveyance, evaporation, seepage. And now, on the other hand, integrated micro irrigation solutions consist of closed piping networks, right from the source to the root zone of the crops. And this results in huge savings of water and a substantial increase in crop yields, right? And there are other advantages of this as well, which include, savings in input costs, fertilizers, and energy. The main point here is, how do we look at institutionalizing this countrywide, right? So there are examples of various states which are adopting micro irrigation for drip irrigation for quite some time. And I think the work that we are doing in not just in India, but in other parts of the world as well, I think, the shining examples of how we're trying to do this through a multi-stakeholder platform framework where we are involving the government, the private sector, and the civil society to come together to institutionalize these models. So I could start by giving you an overview of 2030 WRG and the work that we're doing specifically in this space, and then link that up with, the questions on interventions that have yielded water use efficiency and productivity. So
that'd be great. Yeah, if you can just sort of give us a quick spiel on as an example from the field.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. So 2030 WRG, as most of you would be aware, is a lighthouse project of the World Economic Forum, which is where we were conceived, and we are currently part of the World Bank's Water Global Practice. We work in 11 countries, including India, where we are working, like I mentioned, on a multi-stakeholder platform framework, because while water is a state subject, it's not the remit only of the government, right? We need collective call to action. And our multi-stakeholder partnerships, supported by the 2030 WRG, are working with governments, with the private sector, with civil society, with WUAs, with FPOs, and with businesses to transform water-intensive value chains in agriculture to unlock water savings and profitability. So our leadership areas, like I just mentioned, one of them is transforming value chains. And the other two are building resilience and also a circular water economy.
In addition, we focus on disruptive technologies and innovative financing as two cross-cutting areas of focus. So our value chain interventions in the countries we work in cover close to 3 million hectares, impacting more than 200,000 farmers by improving water use efficiency and creating market opportunities for farmers. And we have very interesting examples in Asia and Africa. I'm happy to share, maybe specific examples, specific India examples, of our successful interventions, which sort of bring together public-private community partnerships and lead to agri-water demand, I would say, optimization through market-driven approaches. And if we have time, I could also share some interesting work that we're doing towards building a circular water economy.
Hey, Kavita,
that'd be great.
If I may interrupt, request if you could keep your video on, please, because
yeah, there is a bit of an internet issue here. I'm on my hotspot, so I
okay.
yeah,
Sure.
No.
Sorry about that. I think this has just been.
We'll do the best we can,
Kavita. Wary about
Thank you.
losing this.
Yes. No worries. No worries.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for being present. So that's great. So Kavita, I'm going to come back to you. I do want you to share an example of Maharashtra. Reshma, just reflection on what Kavita shared, perhaps, and also speak a little bit towards the role of the industry stewardship. I mean, Unilever has a deep engagement on this issue. This just goes beyond CSR. So help me understand what are the compelling reasons there are, business or otherwise, for Unilever to really dive in here, and certainly bring up some examples just to help us understand what success looks like and what lessons are being learned.
Wow, that was like a battery of questions. So let me just step back and actually explain why we were set up as as a foundation working specifically on water, and while we've as a business, we've done it in our supply chain, we've done it in communities, we've done that historically before any regulation came to that effect. I think it was very clear that water is going to be a critical source of risk for communities and consumers across the world, and that's the reason why we wanted to make sure that we actually participate as true corporate stewards in helping bridge government, civil society, communities, and what markets could do on the issue of water. But there are some principles that we took which I find like really unusual and rare for a private sector player. And I think one of the first things that we took on as almost like our North Star is that water is a common. It's a common resource, it's a shared resource, right? And therefore the role of participating communities was very, very critical. So it was not just about the technology of how do you manage water, but actually getting it done in a way which is very scientific and equitable across different conditions. And so there are a couple of areas, and basically what we do is three things, right? We just help people save more, use less, and measure better, right? So those are basically the three core areas that we work across the spectrum of our programs. And I think that when you look at water, one, it is a common and shared resource, so you can't look at an individual solution alone. And the second is that water is not just irrigation, right? It is the trinity of soil, surface, and groundwater, right? So therefore, anything that we look at as a vertical of just irrigation tends to ignore the issues around groundwater recharge and soil as well, right? So we were very clear that the trinity, water is in this trinity, and it cannot be kind of parceled and siloed. And so interestingly, a lot of our work has actually focused on building a DNA of numeracy around water, which is completely non-existent, right? And numeracy is not just through measured or metered irrigation, right? It's also through scorecards, right? So how can a farmer actually maintain a scorecard of their input use? It is through behavior games, right? So a lot of simulation around, scenarios of what farmers can do collectively and individually when water, the water context changes for them rapidly. And we've seen these have been very, very powerful ways of getting, the kind of, impact at a community or at a system level, because suddenly everybody realizes that their choices and their decisions have interconnected consequences, right? And therefore, if they want to do well as a community on their water future, they will have to make choices around what they grow in their fields and how much, they grow in their fields so that everyone has access to water. So I think numeracy has been something that we worked on, relentlessly, because I think numeracy also creates agency for farmers to make good, smart choices. I think the second aspect has been on human capacity, right? Which is not to say that technology is not critical, but this country has this incredible cadre of first mile workers, right? Often ignored because we have again relegated them to informal roles. But they're the ones who know their communities really well, and a lot of our work has actually now focused on how do you capacitate the first mile in and build a cadre and a workforce for India, because
Right.
the great source of rural jobs, but it's also about transforming the rural economy through knowledge, through science, instead of just looking at program implementation or innovation deployment, which typically tends to happen. And I
Right.
think that the last bit is really about bringing in gender, not because we have to talk about it, but because
Right.
India has a unique dimension on feminization. 40% of our agricultural workforce is women. We're completely silent from a technology, policy, program lens, right? And interestingly, we looked at a couple of studies where the notion is that women farms tend to be less productive actually when knowledge transfer happens. So for example, in paddy, there are no differences between women led and operated farms and women and male led and operated farms, right? So it's really about making sure that we recognize that the key actors and catalysts in this system are going to be people aided and supported ably by technology, and obviously leveraging on the state system and the state capacity. Water is a space which is extensively covered, unfortunately in a fragmented way, across a large number of flagship government programs, right? And this is really where entrepreneurs, foundations like us, have that opportunity of how do you actually address clear pain points that governments have, right? And figure out a way of building the government system capability also of doing this kind of delivery at scale. So that's basically our approach and our experience so far. And I think for us it's been really interesting to look at this intersection of technology and human capability.
Right.
And it has dramatic results when when they end up complementing each other really well.
So first of all, so let me thank you for that. And I love that technology and human capability. And I can see Malesh really getting ready to talk on this. And Malesh, I'm going to come to you. But just to let me capture this right. So what you're saying is groundwater water is local. It needs to be locally planned. Solutions are probably the more effective. And you need to build the local capacity to plan and execute on this. So
sure. We already
and thank you for bringing that gender piece as well, because that is just so critical for India. I mean, like it's right there. And so Kavita, you asked me to ask you a question earlier in your statement, so here we go. So you've been working in Maharashtra, so just like Reshma, maybe give me some concrete examples of what interventions are yielding results in delivering this water efficient agriculture. From the perspectives of you're sort of sitting as a World Bank, from the perspective of policy, how is industry coming in, the multilateral agencies, the tech startup ecosystem, just a multi-stakeholder 360-degree view. And then Malesh, we'll come to you in a second.
Sure. So I think there's several examples, but I think maybe we could talk about two to start with and then see how much time we had. So the first one is an initiative right here, Richie, in Maharashtra. And Maharashtra is, I think it's a great state to be in because there's so much of diversity of agroclimatic regions, diversity of demographics, and also diversity in terms of the regions, right? There's rural, there's urban, there's tribal areas in Maharashtra. And 2030 WRG has actually facilitated development of an innovative integrated approach through PPCP partnerships covering three critical aspects.
Sorry, PPCP? I'm sorry to interrupt. Just so that everybody gets it.
PPCP stands for, absolutely, PP. So synonymous to us. So PPCP stands for Public-Private Civil Society Partnerships, which is the classic multi-stakeholder approach that we follow. So that covers three critical aspects. One related to off-farm water management. The second one related to on-farm water use efficiency and productivity. And the third one is related to market linkages. So the Water Resources Department in Maharashtra, as most people would be aware, is responsible for off-farm water management, which is basically everything to ensure bulk water distribution up to the farm gate, right? And then we have the private sector and civil society organizations, along with the water user associations, which perform the functions related to on-farm water use efficiency and productivity and market linkages. So 2020 WRG actually facilitated MOUs between the Water Resources Department and the private sector partners, under the PPCP model, which currently covers more than 250,000 hectares in command areas or irrigated areas in Maharashtra, which is spread across 8 districts in the state, with established private sector and civil society organizations. And these include the likes of ITC and other well-established social enterprises working with communities. So the innovations that we drove here, basically 2-3 things. So one is that this model goes beyond capacity building or training initiatives and aims to achieve water use efficiency and productivity gains. So the stuff they're doing on intercropping, on drip irrigation, on planting of pre-germinated seeds with wide spacing and similar interventions. So it's going beyond just capacity building and training. We're also working with the Water Resources Department to establish an inter-department coordination mechanism, so between not just the WRD, but between the Agriculture Department, the Soil and Water Conservation Department, the other stakeholders in the state, like the World Bank funded projects like the POCRA and SMART, and a detailed project implementation, a dedicated project implementation unit was established via government order to support and coordinate activities of these organizations among the command areas. So this is a very, I would say, very unique policy intervention. And through that, we've identified key indicators, which we've outlined for measuring outcomes under this model. So for each of those 3 parts that I mentioned. So for example, for the second part, on-farm water use efficiency, we've defined key indicators which include additional area brought under irrigation, or the percentage of farmers adopting micro-irrigation, the number of functional WUAs, agriculture practices adopted by farmers. For the third part that I mentioned on market linkages, we measure outcomes such as MOUs with off-takers, increase in farmer income. And the first part, which was to do with on-farm infrastructure, where the government takes the lead, we build in outcomes such as increase in water flows to the farm gate, extent of infrastructure, water infrastructure repair. Okay, so these are little ways that we're trying to kind of institutionalize this and increase the command areas under irrigation, under micro irrigation. We're also working with startups on digital tools for water accounting, both surface and groundwater. And this is basically for facilitating data-driven water budgeting, not just at the GP level or the Gram Panchayat level, but we're also talking about the WUA level and the watershed level. And
wow. Okay.
I'm happy to share that initial evaluation estimates, these were independent estimates through universities in Maharashtra that indicate that till date, ITC has achieved water savings of over 125 million cubic meters, through improved water use efficiency in onion and sugarcane crops. It's about 8% in onion and about 20% in sugarcane, over a large command area. So that is one shining example, I would say, in Maharashtra. This is just the beginning, and we're having a large number of, private sector partners and civil society organizations coming forward to be a part of this. The department has recently also launched an RFP for strengthening of water user associations. So there's a lot that's happening, but clearly the government is in the driver's seat, and we are trying to get the private sector and civil society organizations to join them. And I would say this is a good example of how we're trying to institutionalize a momentum around, agri-water productivity, keeping the farmers in the fulcrum. There's also a second example in Karnataka, which is on the same lines. We call it the Karnataka, the Ramthal micro irrigation project. And that's another, it's I think the largest one of its kind drip irrigation project in India, in Asia actually, and it covers 24,000 hectares and about 15,000 farmers, again, with the aim of providing sustainable access to irrigation through adoption of micro irrigation as well as market solutions. So again, a PPP model implementation of this project has helped reduce the water used for agriculture by 40%. The government again is in the driver's seat, and the project also established something called a drip to market agro corridor, which has demonstrated impact by improving farmer incomes through demand-driven water management, incentivizing adoption of water efficient technologies through private sector and market off-takers. So this has successfully connected farmers to markets with water user associations, and they're now working in agribusiness marketing. So they have achieved water use efficiency and basically increased farm income. So here also a critical success factor was the constitution of a PIU, which is the Project Implementation Unit, jointly with the Water Resources and the Agriculture Department, and the PIU continues to communicate and transact with established buyers and connect them with the water user associations. So I think these are two really live examples, I would say, which highlight how a collaborative multi-stakeholder approach with the government playing a key role in bringing it together can go a long way. And we're hopeful that these experiences and learnings will guide the states in strengthening the MSP and move towards sustainable water and agriculture management.
I'm sure we'll have a few questions on that as well. But you mentioned, both you and Reshma mentioned about, so this is great joint effort, multi-stakeholder approaches, links to markets. One of the questions I see coming up in the chat screen here is what about pricing water? How do we it's a free resource. Why don't we think about pricing it? Doesn't that drive incentives to change, or doesn't that create incentives to change behavior? Or do we think about a water tax? How do you respond to those questions?
Yeah, I think we need to move from just thinking about pricing water to valuing water, right? Because it's not just about price, and there's this whole issue of human rights attached to it, right? So there are regulatory authorities. For example, Maharashtra has a Maharashtra Water Resources Regulatory Authority. There are 6 states in the country which have a water regulator. And there is a lot happening in terms of deciding tariffs for agriculture, tariffs for industries, tariffs for the urban use. But I think there's a lot of room, to try and sort of cross-subsidize one for the other. I mean, you can definitely look at charging, higher tariffs for industrial use, or maybe try and disincentivize use of fresh water when you can use treated wastewater, right? I mean, there are a lot of interventions which are on the anvil. This is work in progress, but one thing I'd just like to sort of, I don't want to take all the time, for this session, but I just like to say that I think we need to move very clearly from pricing water to valuing water, because once we keep that, that dimension, I think the way we look at water would change, because water is it's not just a sector, it's a connector, right? And we need to move from just hunting for water to cultivating it, and from pricing water to looking at how we can value water.
So valuing for equity and justice. And Reshma, do you agree, or do you have a
I think it's very important to actually look at it from a resource management lens, and not just from pricing of a resource lens, because there is a larger context of it's not just you can charge farmers for water. Are you willing to pay the price in terms of more expensive food, right? So there is a very clear interconnectedness of the issues around water. And interestingly, again, in India, Manish alluded to this in the past as well, that, we've got to recognize our context. We get sufficient rainfall, right? We're at 700, 800 millimeters of average rainfall per year. It is, I think, the key thing is, how do you make sure that the resources really managed and deployed very effectively and equitably? And so how do your public utilities work on distribution of water? Right? How do your canal systems work, on just efficiency and reach, right? How do you work on, with on-farm solutions to optimize the use of water? How do you treat soil, as much of a resource for the farmer as water? So I think, again, it's important to make sure, and, Kavita kind of put it well, that how do you make sure that all stakeholders in the system actually value water and use it appropriately, right?
Right.
And it's true for us, by the way, right?
Yeah.
We value water, right? We're very used to the fact that we have utilities that deliver water to our homes, right? But you could, there are ways in which you can reduce your water footprint dramatically as well, right? And I think, again, which is the reason why the philosophy of a common is everyone does their bit. It is not that you go with, just carrots and sticks, because again, you will be dealing with the unintended consequences of all of these good intentions, right? So, I think, again, you've got to look at the fact that it's not about it's not just about pricing. It's about making sure that we actually have a very effective, around water in the country.
So So that's helpful. So both, I think, so Malesh, listening to this conversation so far, I'm hearing participatory approaches, really engage with the government, really value water, look at equity and justice, uh, sort of really, sort of, it's a cohesive whole there. You're the entrepreneur here. So how does the entrepreneur feel like about this? I mean, like, what drives change in behavior then for the farmer? How do you go out and make sure that you can achieve scale? So let's just say, talk to me about, how technology in farmer's hand can help the farmer become a steward of this resource. What kind of technologies allow that to happen? And how does the farmer access these tools, and what kind of incentives drive a farmer towards accessing these tools? Are they public incentives? Are they policy? Is it pricing? How do you see this?
I think one thing I firmly believe, and I agree with the rest of the panel members, is farmer is a key stakeholder and he has to have a stake in the entire proposition. Right now, many of the solutions that we are putting, okay, will not see farmer as a key stakeholder. I will take examples of how did we bring the stakeholder interest, okay, to the next level. First example was at Rajmandri, where farmers have been growing this crop, okay, for a period of last 60 or 70 years. Initially, it was all flood irrigation based cultivation, but over a period of 10 years, because the yield started declining and the crop had different kind of chemical being deposited into that, they analysis said we need to move into drip irrigation kind of thing. So the company and the farmer decided to deploy drip irrigation over roughly around 5 to 6,000 hectares, but it did not give desired results because originally, as you can see, it was flood irrigation, from flood irrigation to drip irrigation. As I said earlier, drip irrigation is a means by which efficiency can be improved, but you need to apply your thought and make sure, okay, you understand the local conditions to precisely provide irrigation. So once we were brought into the picture, we try to understand what exactly is farmer saying and what are they doing, because there is a behavioral change that is required. And when we talk about technology, farmer always says, okay, saying that, am I supposed to pay for this technology? The question is, he's not getting a value, he's not going to pay for that. So it took us one season, because that is a window of opportunity we get, okay, to talk to farmer, demonstrate the technology, convince him and show the value. At the end of one season, what we were able to show is, we told him first, what you are saying is not true, because he doesn't have a mechanism to measure the amount of water that gets into ground. Because agronomically, if a scientist says you need to provide water to a depth of 6 inches, there is no way you can measure the 6 inches in the ground and say I've given for 6 inches or 4 inches or 8 inches. There has to be some tools. Now the tool we can provide, okay, like a private player, but we cannot provide it free of cost. So the question is, when farmer deploys the tool, if it is going to be just saving water, he is not going to see a real value in that. That saving water should translate to some extra revenue for him. Now, how is he going to get that extra revenue? The yield has to increase and the quality has to increase, and perhaps the labor engagement should come down. These were three measures, okay, that we put for the farmer at this Rajmandri project that we did. At the end of the project, at one season, we were able to bring in 62% water saving and around 15% productivity improvement, around 20% of the quality improvement. So what did farmer achieve? When he went to the market with that improved product, he was able to get roughly around 45,000 rupees more revenue. Now, demonstrated that he is able to get 45,000 rupees per hectare. I'm 100% sure we can talk to him saying that, look, my technology is going to be costing you 20,000 or 30,000. He'll be in a listening mood. Compared to that, if I had gone to him 1 year back saying that my technology is costing even 10,000, he would have said, This is one example. I would like to take an example of what we are doing with paddy growers. Because historically in India, paddy is grown where it takes too much of water. I don't know how many of the how many people are aware that it takes roughly around 1.8 to 2 crore liters to grow 1 hectare of paddy. So every inch of water we fill into the paddy ground will take roughly around 2.5 lakh liters of water. So when farmer provides water, he is not really putting value to water because there is no money that is being charged for water, and there is no money that government is charging for electricity. Right? Since both of them are free, nobody is putting any price on that. I can see on the messaging system saying that can we not put a tax, can we not put a charge kind of thing. But the other way I look at is, okay, farmers are aware that they are using more water. Their question is, tell me how can I reduce the usage of water? There were technologies like alternate wetting and drying, which was used by different groups. But what happened is this alternate wetting and drying was not perfectly improvised. They said there is a tool where farmer has to go take a measurement at reasonable intervals, and based on that he has to make a decision. Now, farmer 20 years back, farmer is to be 100% committed to a small piece of land, and there would be a ecosystem, okay, where they used to be in a group, what do you call, a joint family, and there used to be many people who would have taken one or the other activity. Now it's all fragmented. Farmer is doing multiple activities, and he will not be able to sit at the farm waiting for the power to resume so that he can start the irrigation and measure how much water has risen. And to add to that, electricity is not available only during daytime. Just imagine at the end of the day, electricity resumes at around 10 o'clock and it's available till 2 o'clock. We can't expect a farmer to be at the field, okay, at 12 or 12:30 midnight, trying to measure what is the rise of what is the water level. That is inhuman. So when we went to him, his answer was basically, yeah, you show the value to us. Paddy is not a commercial crop, but if you can show value in terms of exactly the yield and quality where I can count more money, then I'm willing to invest into this technology. So here also we were given one crop season. And at the end of that, in Punjab, where the productivity is already at its peak, we are able to bring in roughly around 10% revenue increase to the farmers. Now, currently I'm in Punjab talking to farmers. Yesterday I felt so nice to see at least around 20 to 30 hands going up out of a team of around 40 odd farmers saying that, yes, we are willing to adopt this technology because we see a value. And how do we demonstrate that value? We deployed the system, and we had the farmers talk on behalf of on top about the experiment, the benefit that they got, and why rest of the farmers got. This is what I call it as a value. Technology as a tool, when implemented, engaging farmer, it can give desired results. And once we are sure of that, then we need to bring in the policy and other thing to make sure farmer understand that he has to take part in that, and he has got a definitive stake in that.
So look, you've offered two examples on the farmers, just very quickly, and this one really quickly, 1 minute. Give me an example of something where technology helps the policymaker make better decisions. We're talking about the farmer as a steward. So that's the one bottom up that we hear from Reshma and Kavita as well, that, farmers need to be part of the stewardship. They're the nearest to the water. But policy also has a role to play. But they need better information. So how does technology play a role there? Is this public technology? Is it private sector? How do you think about that?
I look at policy as a tool, okay, that can actually make decisions once there is sufficient data available. I cannot be sitting in New Delhi and making policy based on certain assumptions. If you take the example of Punjab, geographically it is 1.4% of the India's land. But in terms of the tube wells or bore wells, it is having roughly around 10% of bore wells of India. That explains why the water level is declining at an alarming rate. Similarly, we are talking about how do we enable the farmers to improve water use efficiency. There are a lot of formulas that are being used, okay, to measure the water. But if the tools and the devices are not kept, okay, at least to the sample required amount of samples, the measurement will not be accurate. When I speak to the farmers, when I ask them, and even various people who are working with farmers ask, how much water is going to get used to grow 1 kg of paddy or 1 kg of sugarcane? The answers are all ranging from few hundred liters to few lakh liters. So what you don't know, you cannot improve that. So policies are there basically to enable the farmers to be more efficient, and the efficiency can happen only if you're able to establish a baseline and measure and improve that.
Got it. No, that's helpful. Thank you for that clarification. So Reshma, just back to you really quick. There's a question that's coming up also around, what are the plans of doing knowledge transfer to farmer, or any plans of incentivizing the farmer through CSR and other grants? How does that work?
There's no, all our work. So for example, the case that Malesh spoke of in Punjab is in partnership with one of our programs there, where we have access to farmer cooperatives in the state. And so for let's say, for example, a player like Cultivate to actually come in becomes so much easier, right? So I think we see our role in terms of actually engineering these kind of partnerships and bringing them together in areas which have, again, a very specific crop system, agroclimatic conditions and market context, right? So again, who do you need to bring in? and orchestrate these partnerships becomes,
Right.
a role that we take on. When it comes to knowledge transfer to farmers, again, a combination of civil society partners who actually have reach in communities and the use of technology again needs to be designed appropriately.
Right.
When it's
Right.
done, it then creates that kind of impact. I think there's also if we really want to do this at scale, the power of actually demonstrating and proving to farmers is really important. So no matter
Right.
how many videos and how much content you generate, right, the proof is really when farmers see it for themselves. So scaling up the power of actually these demos, which means that how do you bring your KVKs even closer to farmers, right? So today, how do you build some of this infrastructure which was created for the farm system closer to the farmer? How do you get access to where they can see, measure, assess the impact of innovations, and then see
Right.
and gain the confidence that this is something that's going to work for them. I think
Right.
the other aspect that we tend to miss is that there is a complete absence of appropriate financing, solutions again for farmers, right? Uh, you're expecting farmers to mitigate their climate risk, their finance risk, and market risk all by themselves, right? And so I think, again, it's really critical when you're bringing in innovations which are good for farmers, right? How are you also, creating that kind of appetite for financing to be accessible, for farmers, and the recovery
Right.
period to really be within one cropping season, because that is the unit of time for a farmer. You cannot say over 3 years, you can recover your investment, because farmers don't know what the next season is really kind of going to bring in, right?
Right.
So I think, again, it's really critical to to do this in a way that you're bringing in crop system, and region appropriate solutions to farmers that they can see, measure, assess, and the adoption is really a function of how many barriers you've been able to dismantle for them.
Right.
And finance is a barrier.
Right. Right. Yeah, I'm always amazed at how much risk a smallholder farmer takes. People like you and me would not take that risk consistently twice a year. That's 2 crops. It is absolutely incredible. So Reshma, you talked about models, and then that's exactly, you have to sort of remove the barriers and get to scale. And scale involves always a certain degree of investment from policy, rethinking, redesigning that particular tool. So have you seen sort of examples, Kavita, Reshma, either of you, through your work, where policies have sort of reoriented and you've seen sort of some major uptake?
Yeah, I think just to go back to the point that Reshma and Malesh made, and I think just to add to that, I think we also need to drive mindset change, Ruchi, across the agricultural ecosystem to adopt disruptive or innovative technologies within a policy-based framework, with measured improvement in crop quality and scale of production. So we keep talking about farming as a service, right? I mean, that's as a truly sustainable model or an institutional model. But how can we make it truly institutional, and how can we provide opportunities to make farming lucrative, and incentivize those thousands and lakhs of reverse migrants, I mean, which happened during COVID, to pursue their home-based occupation more meaningfully. So can we look at a model where disruptive technologies allows them to pursue agriculture by choice, and not agriculture by chance? And I think we need to think along those lines. I think we need to think farmer prosperity instead of farmer livelihoods. And I think Israel is a great example, that comes to my mind as I talk on agriculture innovation and how they've implemented sustainable agriculture to transform a desert, into I mean, they've been able to use excel at wastewater management even on a scale that few other countries have matched. And I think they've been able to do that through strategic planning, effective policy implementation, even financing. And I think on financing, again, we need to look beyond traditional bank financing and subsidy-driven models. And given that there is either too little water or too much water or too polluted water, I think lack of investment at the desired level obviously hampers water security and agri-water security. So I think we need to also look at making, we need to make social and environmental considerations not as lenses for rejection of opportunities, but the front and center, as it were, in the decision-making criteria for investors. And there's a lot happening in this space, right? There's blended finances, impact investing. There are impact bonds which are being launched,
Right.
in the education space and the healthcare space, and these replace the approach to investing from one based on risk and return to risk, return, and
Other outcomes, yes.
So we need to look at newer ways of financing. We need to look at maybe pension funds where we can position water infrastructure as an asset class. There are green bonds. The SEBI has guidelines for green bonds, and from what I remember, they've allocated several categories as green projects, which include sustainable water management and climate change adaptation also in the list. So agriculture under the SEBI guidelines, they have organic farming, zero budget natural farming, and sustainable irrigation practices. All these come under land use and sustainable water management. Also, RBI has water infrastructure and management, and RBI has recognized the need for funds in this sector. So I think there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of sort of attracting private capital or catalytic capital into the sector and looking beyond traditional financing or traditional,
right,
the subsidy-driven model. I don't think we've even scratched the surface. And like I said in the beginning, this is one of our cross-cutting themes in the in 2030 WRG, where we're trying to get innovative finance from different sources, and bring it to the water sector across the agriculture, the urban, and the industrial space.
No, I'm heartened to hear you say that, because really it's a chicken and egg thing, isn't it? I mean, the more you measure, the more you learn, the more data you collect, the more confidence the financiers have. You're allocating risk better. So I'm heartened to hear you say that there's green impact bonds and social impact bonds, et cetera, that are being thought through. And I'd love to see more and more of that happen. But Reshma, I mean, like, again, to you, I mean, like, so financing aside, that's one piece, and we can come back to it. But are there other tools that are available that can sort of, India, it's a state and water the water is a state and a center subject. So how do we sort of create a race to the top among the states? Is there a way to think about that?
I think the most important thing is to bring in some sense of convergence on the way, water is looked at, right? So there is, unlike health, education, that always struggle for, substantive budgetary allocations. I'm going to stick my head out here and say that actually water does get support, right? 60% of NREGA money is actually towards soil and moisture, conservation, right? We've got a lot of flagship government programs that are trying to, to address the challenge. I think, again, from a policy lens, what is important is to build a case for convergence, right? How do you fewer schemes, fewer flagship programs, but they're more integrated to kind of solve for issues. So if, for example, you're doing a large-scale watershed program in any of these states, you do a large program about 2,200 odd watersheds, right? Just building strong decision support systems for government was our biggest contribution, right? That's it. All we did was, plan versus expenditure. What's really going on? Where do you need to, kind of dose down your expenditure? Where have you actually neglected large parts of the state, and you need to kind of target your investments there? So I think, again, the opportunities are in terms of bringing some semblance of convergence in the way water is actually looked at, right? And then start saying what are the kind of investments that would be made. The big challenge that I also see in terms of the way we look at measuring impact and outcomes is that we again get into how much water have we saved and so on and so forth. But governments need an economic case, right? And one of the key things that we're looking at, for example, in our programs, and even when we work with entrepreneurs, is what's your contribution to the local GDP? Because then you built an economic case saying that when we make this investment, right, whether you make an investment in technology, whether you make an investment in human capability, right, have you actually contributed to, that rural economy? Have you increased rural GDP by an amount which is going to get the government to sit up and notice, right? And I think, again, that's really where agriculture is so powerful, because if you get things right, you can actually create a step jump. And then to present that as the economic case for government, saying why should investments be made in a certain way, on irrigation, on farm, becomes so much easier.
That's perfect.
Otherwise, again, you're struggling for attention and saying, well, nobody wants to actually work in a crisis sector, right?
No.
So, but presenting a solution in a way that it's going to fuel, the economy, in a
Right.
really positive direction becomes really important, right? Now, that means willy-nilly, you need to have depth in programs, you need to have effective solutions, you need to have, some tipping point of coverage, because, a middling scale of a pilot is not going to get you there, right? So in some ways, when you make that as your goal post, a lot of
Gotcha.
other things start kind of falling in place as well.
Thank you. No, that's helpful. And we have 5 minutes remaining, so just a couple of rapid fire pieces. So Malesh, very rapid fire, public finance, private finance, we're talking about making the business case. From the private sector, how are you thinking about the role of, should the public finance be coming towards R&D to do more innovation in this space? How are you, or how do you corral private sector finance to support sort of, innovation and technology in this space?
Yeah, definitely government also has to invest on this kind of research and development, because it takes a lot of resources to do the research, and it takes a lot of, so that's one good area. Second one, we could be a bit more creative in making sure, okay, the technology, what is going to go to farmer, could get funded different beneficiaries. For example, if you're talking about water, there are industries that use excess water and they don't have any other choice, okay, to further optimize on that. So when a farmer saves this excess water because he's adopting some technology, can they incentive the farmer? Similarly, the carbon trading. When a paddy growing farmer, okay, is going to be save on 30 to 40% water, there is definitely a reduction in carbon emission. So can we look at companies buying the carbon credit and incentivizing the farmer? So one is in investing on the technology to do the R&D and all those things. Second one, other ancillary industries or other industries, okay, coming and funding this project at the deployment level. I think this is the way we can take it to the next level.
Thank you. I think we're coming pretty close. So just as we wrap up, and you brought up this carbon issue, and I really wish we had more time because that's one I'd like to dig into a little bit more. So look, the forum, I want to cede my time and get a couple of last words from you all, actually. The forum is for social entrepreneurs. I mean, we have people listening who are willing and eager to innovate and contribute to solving this problem. So how do we unlock this entrepreneurial talent here? I mean, as panelists, do you have any advice, words of encouragement that you'd give to the audience? Open question.
We work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and I think one of the key things that we always ask is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve for? Who are you trying to solve it for? And how will you know that it's been done? And you'll be surprised how often people get stumped with questions, right? So I think, again, it's what's the problem that you're trying to solve? Who are you going to solve it for? And how will you know that when it has been solved? I think that's really, really critical. The second, component is, design your venture with partnerships at the core. Partnerships are always thought as an afterthought, right? Or, well, let's go out and partner. But, core to your business model, especially if you want to work in the, in the farm space on water, you will need, different stakeholders to come in. So in the way you're even designing your model, what are some of the more strategic partnerships that you would want to embed from day one, right? And yes, at the end of the day, you're servicing the farmer. So how is the farmer's, life going to be significantly better because of what you're doing? And are you layering any, unintended risks on farmers, when you bring in a certain solution? So I think those are questions that we ask very often.
So that's very sage advice. Thank you. And I think you're going to get the last word here. We're coming to a close. So let me just wrap up one by saying thank you all. I learned a lot. One of the things that really you all made visible for me was make it visible. Groundwater is not invisible. Measure, help people access and understand key science and data. Build local water management solutions. Sort of make it all local by equipping local stakeholders, so to say, with the tools that they need, and build sort of political resilience on this. So bring the people along, the polity along, make it regional, perhaps. So it's fascinating. It's a very deep dive, but thank you so much. I hope the audience really enjoyed this discussion, and I see myself carrying this on with you all down the road. I really appreciate it. Over to you, Vilgro, and thank you, Vilgro, again for hosting this meeting.
Thank you, Richie, and thank you, Vilgro.
Thanks.
A big thank you, Kavita, Malesh, Reshma, and Richie for sharing your thoughts and experiences with us on this topic. It was such a delight to be part of this session and hear you all. Up next, please do head over to our networking lounges to meet Venkatesh of NSDC and Pushpak from Sequoia. And post lunch, we'll be having 2 sessions around building a climate resilient agricultural economy and catalyzing rural micro entrepreneurship. You can also meet Siddharth Gahoy of Tata Trust and Rajaganapati of Mercedes-Benz R&D in the networking lounges. Thank you all who joined us and see you again soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
Bye.